Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems, and with me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
How can we increase revenue from existing accounts? We've talked about referrals and increasing the price. However, we may have left out some important techniques and strategies, which is why we are joined today by another special guest, Victor Antonio. Join us as Bill and I and Victor Antonio discuss Mastering the Upsell and other great ideas on episode 478 of Winning at Selling podcast.
But before we bring Victor on, which I'm very excited to hear what he has to say about upselling, we're going to continue to talk about the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. We are in habit 3, just starting that first 20 pages or so, page 145 to 162 in my book. And It's called Put First Things First. And Scott, I know he had some good questions to start with, and those were in your notes. So why don't you bring up those two important questions?
It's ironic. It seems like the segments that he has are the book titles of his future publications. So we've got a book titled First Things First is one of the ones that he wrote. So some of the questions that he asked right at the beginning, the first paragraph is, what one thing could you do that you aren't doing now that if you did on a regular basis would make a tremendous positive difference in your personal life? And then the second question is, what one thing in your business or professional life would bring similar results? And it seems like that's kind of the essence of what's important and what matters. And I think that was kind of the context of this chapter. Is that kind of what you picked up to, Bill?
Well, we're going to be getting into the time management quadrant. That's a big part of it. But I really don't think we ask ourselves this type of question often enough. We get involved in our day, and our day sometimes runs us, and calls we have coming in, or emergencies that happen, or maybe even regular things that we have to do. For me, it's doing a podcast and all the things that are associated with that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those run our day. And when we're going to put first things first, it's not always the urgent things that win. And I think that's what he really is going to talk about in this, in the time management quadrant. The urgent, important, Quadrant 2 is so important. So let's go over those 4 quadrants pretty quickly, and then we'll focus on Quadrant 2. The first quadrant is urgent and important. And those are the things that kind of force us to spend time. There's nothing wrong with spending time in Quadrant 1, urgent and important. Those are valuable things because they are important. Quadrant 2 is not urgent, but important. And I think what he's going to talk about is we need to learn to carve out time to work on these things because they don't have an urgency that forces us to do them. Quadrant 3 is urgent, but not important. And so those might be the phone ringing. We don't know if that's important. We just know that it feels urgent to us. Or if we're in a meeting, right? We've talked about this, Scott. We're in a meeting and our dinger dings on our phone. Do we pick it up to look at it and tell the client, you're not as important as my phone?
Right.
So we got to be careful of that. And then Quadrant 4 is not urgent, not important. And those are wasted time jobs. Maybe something we used to do that somebody else should be doing. We should delegate it. The urgent, important things, can we develop systems or delegate those as well? So we've got to get those not important things out of our day-to-day so we can spend time in Quadrants 1 and 2.
You said earlier that unfortunately the urgent is the one that gets the most attention, and that's the one that wins, but that's not always the best choice. I think a lot of this chapter can be summed up in one line, and that is that if we don't act on what's important, we react to what's urgent. And sometimes we're not able to complete a goal list, but we end up finishing a to-do list. A to-do list, I always say, are activities. A goal list is a list of productivities that support the goal, that focus on what we want to accomplish, what we're measured, and how our performance is evaluated too at the same time.
One of the things you said that I found very interesting was the progression of the time management theory, where it went from, as you were talking about, checklists. If I could just do a checklist. I remember the story about the man who came to Andrew Carnegie, and he said, I can make your people more productive. And he said, well, how much are you going to charge me to do that? He said, you determine how much you want to pay me when I do it. And what he taught them was to do an ABC 1, 2, 3 prioritized checklist.
Hmm.
And I believe the number he paid him was $50,000 at the time,
Wow,
which
that's
was
a
a
lot of money.
tremendous amount of money,
Yeah.
but it made his people that much more productive to do that list every day. And for me, I even find that simple tool, while it doesn't really always focus in on my total goals and what I have to do, if I can make that list every morning, my productivity doubles. If I
Yeah.
try to work off an old list, or I forget to do it, or I get right involved in something, my productivity is going to go down because I'm not judging what I'm doing. I'm letting the world, or I'm letting the day activate me versus me activating the day.
Right, right. It sounds like it's boiled down to time management can be boiled down into one singular phrase: organize and execute around priorities.
Right. And that's what he
And
said was the next step, right?
yeah,
Do something that are within your priorities rather than just a good list.
right, right. In coaching individuals, one of the first questions I ask is, tell me about your priorities in your life right now. And when you start getting the priorities, now you're going to be able to find out what's most important to them and what they really end up spending their time on, which could be a distraction. But at the same time, you want to be able to understand and know what their goals are and what they want to change in order to get a better result, because that's why they're talking to you. But if you don't respect their priorities, and I'm going to just use an example of children, family is a priority. And sometimes that can have an impact on a normal work week. There could be some challenges at daycare or at school, or there's a soccer game or a football game or a recital or something like that, and you have to adjust your schedule around that. But family can be the most top priority in most individuals, but we have to work around that too.
Right. We have to work on all of those different areas that are important and try to find the balance that works. And sometimes know that we're going to be out of balance, and our family has to understand that we have a big project coming up. We have something important we have to do. And then we have to give them other time later on when that balance can be adjusted a little bit better. So we have to know what's important so that we can go out of balance and then pull ourselves back into balance when the time comes.
Yeah, I like the line by Peter Drucker: effective people are not problem minded, they are opportunity minded. And I think, so often we get really stuck on the saying that, past performance does not guarantee future results. And we've heard that line how many times as a common disclaimer, but if we don't do something different today, tomorrow is going to be the same as it was yesterday. So focus on, and I really love how he just continues to strive and reiterate on, we cannot become principle centered without a vision of and a focus on the unique contribution that is yours to make. And the whole, book seems to be focused on principle centered. What are we really focused on? What is the foundation? Because the foundation, the form follows the foundation, and then the function after that. I think that was in the line from an architect in the book.
Let's take just a minute to talk about this Quadrant Two before we finish up, because he took quite a bit of the chapter to talk about that. So what is Quadrant Two? When I think of Quadrant Two, what is not urgent but is important and sometimes crucial, the first thing that comes to my mind is planning, is thinking about those goals, thinking about what I want to do, thinking about where I want to be, and starting to put a plan into place. Maybe it's a 1-year plan, a 2-month plan, something that looks to the future and says, what am I going to do to make a difference rather than just answer the call day to day? What do you see as some of the things that are in that Quadrant Two for you?
I think the most important thing every single day with a salesperson is lead generation. They need to focus on filling the pipeline. Too often companies invite me in and they say, Scott, hey, can you come and work with my sales team? They have a closing problem. I spend about 15, 20 minutes with one of them and I go, no, you don't. You have an opening problem. You don't have enough leads coming into the pipeline in order for salespeople to have a qualifying conversation with them to be able to determine a need, a problem to present a solution to that gives them a better outcome. And lead generation is the most important thing, I think, for salesperson. And it seems like it's the number one thing that they always want to outsource. Every time they have a problem, hey, can you find a lead generation program for me? Or how can I find more leads? And it's like, well, there's different ways of doing that. But what is the goal of more leads is to more revenue, which is one of the topics we're going to be talking about later, is mastering the upsell, is getting more revenue through our existing client base. But at the same time, we need to constantly be building our client base through lead generation. That's what I think is the most important thing, Bill.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things, again, it's not urgent. I can skip it today and my business won't fail. But if I skip it 5 days in a row, 10 days in a row, all of a sudden failure starts to haunt me. And that's what this quadrant is all about. It's the things that if you let them go today, they won't kill you. But if you let them go long enough, they'll destroy whatever business you're trying to accomplish. So look at that Quadrant Two, find those things that are not urgent, but are important, and make sure you carve out the time to do those because those are going to be your future. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the things he talks about later in the chapter. I know he gets into much more organizational processes that we can use. And what he says is we're not trying to manage time, we're trying to manage ourselves.
Exactly. If I could just add one thing as sort of the punchline, I think, to this part of the book is, if you were to fault yourself for one of these three activities, which would it be? The inability to prioritize, the inability or desire to organize around those priorities, or the lack of discipline to execute around them. And that really summed it up for me. And that really hit home when I read that line.
Yeah. And you're in trouble if you answer yes to that instead of just picking one. So we're going to continue on with this book, finishing up Put First Things First, which is habit 3. So I do have an offer that I want to give. I was able to do the presentations for some of our other listeners, my other presentation. I've got a different presentation I'm going to do now. It's a 40-minute online presentation called What Scares Salespeople. And that is in honor of Halloween coming up. So if you have an event or a group or your sales team that you want to have that presentation done for, I'd be glad to do that. So contact me through winningatselling.com.
Victor Antonio has graciously accepted our invitation to share his wisdom with our listeners. We've had some great authors and guests on the podcast, and I'm really grateful when they always say yes, like Anthony Iannarino. If you haven't listened to that episode, great episode. Rob Jollis did a fabulous job. Joe Pine, Frank Cespedes from the Harvard Business Review. And Victor fits into this group very, very comfortably. He is from a poor upbringing, from one of the roughest areas of Chicago, which didn't stop him from earning his BS in electrical engineering and an MBA and building a 20-year career as the top sales executive and becoming president of a global sales and marketing company that generated $420 million. As vice president of international sales in a Fortune 500, $3 billion company at the time, he was selected from over 500 sales managers to join the President's Advisory Council for Excellence in Sales Management. Please welcome Victor Antonio.
Super glad to be here, guys. Thank you for having me, by the way.
We're excited to have you on the show with us.
Where was one of those companies, Victor? I'm kind of curious.
One was right there in Minnesota.
Oh, great.
Yeah. It was, the company is called ADC Telecommunications.
Oh, yeah.
It was out in Edina, I believe.
Okay, you're right.
Then, by the way, I also worked for another company you might know there, E.F. Johnson.
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
So 2 great companies out of Minnesota.
Yeah. You notice that I said another special guest, so everyone is special. No, I don't mean that.
Now, we had that one guy who wasn't very special.
Well, I tell you, we get inundated with invites for people to be on the show, and Bill and I have just practiced one philosophy, and that is that we are going to invite and recruit the best in the business. We want our listeners to listen to and learn from the best in the business. And Bill and I pick a list, and we go after them, and we're always grateful when they accept. So Anthony, thanks for being with us today.
Well, I'm not Anthony, but that's close enough.
So Victor Antonio, of course. I knew I was going to do that.
No, Anthony's a good friend.
Thanks for calling up.
By the way, Anthony's a good friend. We're both bald. I like to call him AI.
Yeah.
You can have a club with Rob Jollis too, because he's got the same haircut.
He's bald too. Yeah.
There you go. There's a bias here. I noticed there's a bias here. So good.
Yeah.
I'm never going to be successful till I get rid of all this hair.
Right. It certainly makes it simple.
By the way, Bill has that what I call enviable hair, right? That
right.
Hair, like it barely has a hairline. It's just, you hate guys like him.
Right. Now people are going to watch his videos for sure because they want to see the hair. That's one way of doing it. Thanks, Victor. So we've got some questions, and we want to talk about your book that's coming up, but a little bit about the book. And I think, as a sales book, I mean, it has to be better and has to be different. And I know you've got something in this book that you're writing called Mastering the Upsell, right? What's in it? What's better? What's different? What can people learn from it?
I came up with this quadrant where there's only 4 ways to grow your business, right? One is to gain new clients, acquire new clients. The second is to retain existing clients. The third option was, to grow your business, which is upsell, cross-sell. And then the first one is to actually reactivate people who stopped buying, right? Go back and get some of that business. And then when I started looking at the growth piece, which is the upselling and cross-selling, I realized that not a lot of books have been written in general about upselling or cross-selling. And then I noticed in the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years, hardly any books have been written about this. People have touched on this subject. And so at that time, I was really on this whole upselling, cross-selling, because it's getting harder to gain or acquire new clients. So I said, well, let's go back and look at this. And I think there was a study I came across that I have in the book, and it talked about how just through upselling and cross-selling, you can increase your sales by up to 30%. And that was like the kernel of the idea for the book.
Wow. Great.
Why do you think it's fallen out of favor, if it has, right?
I think, Bill, it's not been taught consistently, and it's not part of the sales process.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, when I look at my career in sales, a lot of the growth / revenues that I got were from key accounts, right? If you're doing B2B long sales cycle type deals, and you got key accounts, you're always trying to upsell them and cross sell them. So that was very natural for me. But when I go into the market, I don't see that as much. I don't hear a lot of upselling language within the actual presentation of the actual product.
Right.
And so I became very interested in really just uncovering, well, how many strategies are there for upselling and cross-selling? And has anybody I wanted to create almost like a compendium of strategies. And I came up with 16 different strategies in the book.
One of the trends that we're seeing is that people don't want to even be called salesmen anymore, or salespeople. They want to be, customer facing or business analysts or whatever. And that maybe the words upselling and cross-selling have that kind of connotation.
It could. I mean, anything with the word sell in it, right? Has that connotation. But at the end of the day, when I look at salespeople, I kind of have a different view of salespeople. I mean, everybody has the Glenn Ross, boiler room mindset.
Right.
I drove a BMW. What'd you drive? A Hyundai? That whole thing, right? And so
let me show you my watch.
Yeah, there you go. And so everybody, thinks they have to have, slick hair and back, which is impossible for me. Bill could pull that off.
Right.
And so people have that perception. There was a book written a few years back, and I feel bad I don't remember who the author is, but their title was Value Merchant. And when I remember reading that phrase, that title, I go, what a beautiful way to describe salespeople. People who deliver value. We're value merchants. That's what we sell. We sell value. And so when I think sales, I'm always thinking value for value. I'm going to sell you something of value to help you grow your business. And in exchange, I want some money, because I'm all about the profit motive also, if it helps people.
Stepping back a little bit, learning a little bit about you, what book or what author has had the greatest influence on you in your sales career?
Oh, Zig Ziglar, without a doubt. I always tell the story. Back in like 93, I'm living in Minnesota there. There was this company called Peak Performance something that would always give out tickets to hear some of the big speakers, right?
Yep. Convention center,
Yep, there you go. So I went down there and I saw Zig Ziglar. It was like 93. Yep. And I remember it was like, I don't know, it was like he's on stage. I'm watching him, right? And I don't know, this stream of light comes through the roof. Right. You got the Gregorian chant in the background, right? You got little angels swirling around him, right? And I'm going, that's what I want to be, right? 93. And so fast forward, I joined Toastmasters, learned how to speak there to better my presentation skills. And then I eventually got into sales because I realized that engineers don't make as much money as salespeople. That's another story how I got into sales. But I fast forward, I think it was 2006. I got invited to speak at one of those big Get Motivated seminars where Zig Ziglar was, right?
Yeah.
Oh my.
And so I remember I wanted to meet the guy, right? Because I'm like that guy that I just worship at his knee type of thing, right?
Right.
I'm that fan. And I had done a documentary called The Motivator, where in that documentary, and it's online for free, I talk about the impact Zig Ziglar had on me. So I get to the arena and I'm like, I want to meet Zig Ziglar, right? And they're like, no, you can't meet him. He doesn't really talk to people type of thing, right? I'm like, dang, and I remember during lunch, I went across the street at the hotel just to get some lunch. And the lady called me up who I'd asked. She goes, Zig Ziglar said he'd meet with you. I said, what? Zig Ziglar's meet with? Man, I ran through that hotel. I think I was hit by a car crossing the street, got into the arena, right? And I remember I get there to the door and she's waiting for me. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready. She goes, no, you're not. She goes, no, you're not. Because I was sweating. I was panting and sweating, and I look like a mess, if you know what I mean. And she's like, basically, clean yourself up before I walk in. And so after a couple of minutes, I've cleaned up. And I remember I walk in, and there he is, right? Yeah. And then we start talking, right? And I'm just talking at 90 miles per hour in a 50-mile zone. Right? I'm just blah, 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 blah. Finally, I have to breathe, right? And he says this to me. He says, well, you know who I am. Who are you? Because I totally forgot to introduce myself because I was so enamored by the guy, right? And so we're talking, and I'm not making this part up. Somewhere in the conversation, he's talking to me, And I'm hearing him, but I'm not listening because it's Zig Ziglar.
Mhm.
I'm still looking at him. And I interrupted him. I said, Zig, can I ask you something? He says, sure. I said, can I hug you? You know what he said? He said, sure. And so I give Zig Ziglar a hug, right? And after a while, after crushing the poor guy, I release him. And then he says this magical phrase to me. He goes, my wife Red's a hugger too. And I'm like, what? You're going to let me hug your wife too? You are the man. So that was my encounter with Zig Ziglar. And you know how they say you should never meet your idols?
Right.
Yeah. False. You should meet your idols, and then you put them on a higher pedestal. So I love that man.
What a great story.
Yeah, you bet. Mm-hmm.
What I love about Zig Ziglar, his ability to tell stories.
Oh, yeah.
But really analyze. Anybody who watches a Zig Ziglar video really watches. I mean, his movements on stage, I totally ripped him off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the way he moves on stage, and I'll use that, I'll counter him with a guy like Jim Rohn. Are you familiar with Jim Rohn? Mm-hmm. Now, Jim Rohn stands behind the lectern and doesn't move. Mm-hmm. But yet he's engaging. Zig Ziglar moves like a prowling tiger on a stage. And it's such beautiful movements. And so those two, to me, have always been very impactful in how I talk, and Zig Ziglar, more importantly, in how you present and sell and connect.
Well, I think Brian Tracy could probably be in that category too. Yeah. The way he presents. I mean, he'll pace and he uses his hands. He always does that rolling, traveling, sign with his two hands when he must make a point.
I remember getting his was one of the first. I think it was
Psychology of Selling. I think was probably one of the best and most popular. Nightingale killing it. Yeah.
That cassette series, I think I burned that thing like 5 times easily, going through it 5 times. So that's a great, Psychology of Selling. His content is just amazing. I think he has some of the best structured content of all the speakers I've mentioned thus far. I think he has great structured content.
Right. There's always the foundation. And that's why Bill and I are doing 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This book is written 35 years ago, but the content is so powerful. And if we don't reinforce it, we end up forgetting about it and we struggle. And this urgent and important topic, I think, is so relevant, in today's marketplace, because we are inundated with distractions constantly. I mean, I heard a study that we're like 3,000 interruptions a day just with our phones. How can we stay focused on anything that's important when we got that going on? Yeah.
I really love the way you guys review the book. Like what you guys are doing, you're doing a great job. And you brought that back. And I thought it was like, wow, they're really going through this. And I love the way you're doing that.
Oh, it's a great
book. All right.
Book.
Speaking of books, I want to talk about your book because I want to get into some of these 16 techniques that you've got on upselling. What are your favorites? What do you think we can do? What can we teach our listeners real quickly? Give them a tip or two to start out with.
Let's do the fun ones first. The fun was always like Costco, right? The freemium deal, right? Where you give them a little sample, then they want to buy, right? That was the freemium one. But then freemium is always interesting because, for example, I don't know if you have a Dropbox account, but they give you like 10 gig to start with.
Right.
And then they know you're going to deplete that 10 gig, right? And then all of a sudden, because you've uploaded so much stuff, sunk cost, that you're going to want to stay with them and not move your content over. So I think the freemium model is a great model. And there's so many ways that you can use that: limited features, limited capacity, limited time. And I think that's a great strategy. Another strategy that I say is my favorite strategy because it just simply works is the 3 option strategy. If you offer people 2 options, we know that the brain is like a risk mitigating machine. If I'm not familiar, I'll go with the cheapest option. But if we offer 3 options, people tend to go for the one in the middle. And I've always loved that in proposals. I'm always reminded of, and I think Cialdini wrote about it in his book, Influence.
Right.
Remember the Williams Sonoma bread, I think it was the bread maker example.
Right.
Where, that's one of my favorite because apparently the cheap bread maker, the less expensive one, wasn't selling, right? And so they said, well, we need to go into a higher end market. So they created a higher end product, right? One that was almost like $150 more. And so what happened was they thought they were going to they were thinking they were moving into a different, let's just say an adjacency, another market. But what happened was that people started buying the cheaper one. And the psychology behind it is fascinating. When you have one option and you have nothing to compare it to, you go, is that too expensive? That's what you ask yourself. Is this too expensive? But now you see a more expensive one. And now you ask yourself a different one. You go from, is this one too expensive, to, is spending $150 more worth it? And it's just like, if you slow that one down, it's really interesting. Just by adding a second item, I, the individual, ask myself a totally different question because I have a reference point. And I think that's a powerful one right there. Yeah.
The law of the contrast is very, very influential. Yeah. I love that technique.
Yeah, that's a good one. The other one I like, did you ever see the study by National Geographic with the popcorn? This is it ties into the three options. What they did is they had two popcorns. And by the way, they have there's a video online on YouTube. You can actually see this. And so what they did is they had people come into a theater and they had a bag of popcorn for $3 and a bag of popcorn for $7, right? Not surprising, the majority of people went with the $3, right?
Right.
And so then they asked people, so then they said, well, let's create a third option, right? And where do you think they put the third option? So let me just give you the extreme. The cheapest one is $3. Mm-hmm. The highest one is $7. 3, 7. Where would you put the one between there?
5.
6.
Right. So if you put it at 5, you put it dead in the middle. What they found is that they move it close. They put the second one at 650.
Wow.
And they had an interesting name for it. They called it the asymmetrical dominating alternative.
Wow.
Yeah. What a name, right? You can just sound professional.
Exactly.
Asymmetrically dominating alternative. So, and so what happened is that if you go $3, $5, $7, as Bill says, the majority would buy the one in the middle, and you would be absolutely right. But if we wanted them to buy the $7 one, by nudging the middle one over closer to the higher end value, 650, now people ask themselves a different question. They say, well, for 50 cents more,
right?
Might as well get the best.
Yeah.
And so it's a beautiful way of mentally nudging people without nudging them. Wow. And so I thought that was interesting. I really thought that was interesting. That's one of my favorite ones.
Wow. Yeah. The amygdala and the limbus and all that part of the brain. It's amazing how it works.
It really is. I think when I started studying the brain, I think years ago, when I came up with my podcast, the Sales Influence Podcast, which I think was 2008, I think that's when the rise of neural marketing was beginning, right? The use of functional magnetic resonance imaging machines, as fMRIs, to really see what was going on in the brain was what to me was very fascinating. And I studied a lot of Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman's work.
Yeah.
Back then. And so I always love that part of when we talk about selling, it really is about, there's the logical side you can present to. Then there's the emotional side, which is the impactful side you can present to. But that amygdala, that survival piece, that primal brain, that reptilian brain really drives a lot of our decision-making process. And our job in selling is really, how do you calm that part of that brain down so it doesn't feel that anxiety or that threat?
Yeah.
And I think in today's market, what I tell people is that nobody wants to be sold. We understand that already. But I came up with this universal sales formula. How's that for bold? It's a universal sales formula.
It is.
It's almost like the unifying theory of selling. I'm going to.
Do we need to trademark that? Is that?
I'm going to propose it.
Yeah.
And I got a professor, 2 guys who are going to tell me I'm full of it, or maybe I'm onto something. Here it is. So the unifying sales theory by Victor Antonio. So what happens is I said, we got to simplify this because I don't have, I can't remember. I have ADHD bad, so I can't remember 7 steps, right?
It's working for you.
Yeah. And so what happened was I said, let me come up with a 3-step process, right? And so the first one, would you agree, would be empathy. Like really understand what the customer is going through. Because I think when people know that you truly understand what they're going through, they're more likely to listen to you. Right. That's the first phase. Then you move to the second one. That's my second E, by the way, 3 E's here. The second E is the education phase. That's where you position yourself as an expert. And it's not so much about giving them information, but highlighting what they may not have thought about. We talk about different levels of content. Let me just start with the lower level. Information. I always ask people, do clients want more information? No, they have more information than what they need already. Then the next level would be insight, right? As I define it as information beyond the obvious. That's the next level. Information, then insight, which is information beyond the obvious. In other words, when you tell something to a client, they go, I didn't know that, never thought about it that way, never looked at it that way. But even if you give them insight, which today is table stakes, because everybody provides insight.
Right.
The The next level would be impact. And how is that really going to help me? That's what I mean by the education phase. You let them know, look, here's what you're looking at. Here's how you're not looking at it. Here's where you're missing out on some money, whatever it may be, revenue. And then the last part, the last E, is you empower them to make a decision. And this is where for example, the 3 options come in, right? Because I don't want to push you towards one or towards the other, but I'm going to give you 3 options and lay it out for you. And that's why I can kind of use some of these, upselling strategies to kind of nudge you one way or another, just in my pricing strategy.
All right. So I got lost on that. I had empathy, education, and empower. What did I miss?
Those are the 3. There's 3 steps.
Oh, I thought you said 4. Okay.
No, 3. By the way, if there is a 4th E, is that I would put that right underneath all 3. It says you have to be engaging all the way through.
Right.
Victor, I'm really kind of curious your insight and your experience. This is a question that I always like to ask guests that are involved in the sales industry is, how would you describe a great sales manager?
A great sales manager today.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
So let me give that some context. Okay. About 3 years ago, I wrote a book. I don't know if you see my book, Sales Ex Machina, which is how artificial intelligence is changing the world of selling. So I wrote that 3 years ago. And the reason I emphasize that today and then qualify it with this book is that what we're seeing is an evolution of the sales manager or the sales leader. And that is one that's able to really use data today to really drive the direction and the drive of each salesperson. And I think that's what a lot of us are not understanding, that the technology stack the salespeople are using, the overwhelming amount of information, right? The consistency of using the platforms to pull the data out that you want. It is going to require a new type of leader to say, look, here's what we're looking at. Here's what the data is telling us. And here's what we need to train on. And here's what we need to execute on. So we can talk about people skills, communication skills, make everybody feel comfortable, good coaching, all that. But the new leader is one that really knows how to leverage data and pull whatever insights he needs and then implement that with his sales team.
Wow.
Excellent. That different answer than we've ever gotten, I think. Scott.
Yeah, great advice. I mean,
That's
different
great.
Perspective. It's the engineering background in Victor, I think, that you're really seeing.
All right.
Oh, man. So, by the way, that's okay. One last story. Can I do one last story?
Yeah.
So I'm working for E.F. Johnson, right? E.F. Johnson it's a wireless company. We sell to the public safety markets like police stations, fire departments, so forth, right? So Ken Cook, I can say his name, says, Victor, we're working on this deal. He's the sales guy. I'm the engineer doing the designs. He said, Victor, we're working with Iowa State Power and Gas. We got to go do a deal. We fly down to Iowa. We do the presentation. It takes about 3 months, back and forth. We're competing against Motorola. And Ken calls me one day, man, it's like 11 o'clock in the morning. He said, Victor, we won the deal, right? And I'm like, no. He says, I'm coming over. I'm taking you to lunch. And I'm like, all right. And I'm a young engineer, right? I remember we go out to lunch. He said, Victor, where do you want to go? I said, man, and I'm not stupid. I'm going to the most expensive place I can take this guy, right?
Right.
And so we go to a steakhouse, and I don't order from the right side of the menu. I order from the left side of the menu. I don't care because he's paying, not me, right? And we even snuck in the beer. You know what I mean? I'm all happy. I made that guy pay. We get back to the E.F. Johnson, the facility in the diner, right? And I'm all fat, dumb, and happy. Just won my first deal, my first system sold, right? It was like almost like I think it was like a $5 million system, right? And I'm just like, I'm just all happy about it. And sure enough, I walk into the office, the cubicles, you visualize the cubicles. Yeah. And then there's always that one guy, that one old Dodger engineer. His name is Roy. Roy looks at me with my young, bouncy self, all full of it. He says, what are you so happy about? I said, man, we just won this deal. Ken and I won this deal. And he took me out to lunch, man. And I know he paid big money. So let me ask you a question, Vic. That's what? Now, let me pause here. When somebody says, let me ask you a question, I guarantee you it's never going your way, right? And so he says, let me ask you a question. To which I said, what? He says, how much was that deal? I said, $5 million. He said, how much did Ken spend on you? I said, man, I think he had to have spent, Roy, at least $50 because I ordered that expensive steak. He said, last question, Vic. I said, what? He says, how much commission do you think he'll make on your system? And I said, what? What do you mean? How much do you think he'll make? And I go, I don't know. He said, by my estimation, he'll probably make $50,000. And then he says, I hope you enjoyed the steak. And he walks away. I was like, whoa, are you kidding me? And that was the moment of realization. I'm on the wrong side of this stick.
That's right. And for as long as that guy will complain, he'll never want to sit down and make the phone calls that it takes to become the sales guy.
That's
Wow.
correct.
That's
Everybody
right.
thinks it's easy till they have to do it.
That's right. Well,
And by
it's
the
been
way,
a pleasure having you on the show today.
Absolutely.
We hope you can come back. It sounds like you got a ton of stories. Tell people how they can get hold of you if they want to learn more, want to get your books, anything like that.
I'm all over the internet. So if you just go to victorantonio.com or just type in Victor Antonio, got something called the Sales Influence Podcast. And again, just type in Victor Antonio, you'll find it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Victor, for being on the show with us today.
Thanks. It was a great talk.
You guys are champs. Thank you.
Thanks. My offering today is that I want to offer out to our sales managers, our business owners, a virtual sales meeting where I will facilitate the question, I could sell more if only I could, ... where I will flush out the stalls and barriers to greater sales revenue. So go to the website, winningatselling.com, fill out the form, or feel free to give us a call. Look forward to meeting with you. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, Scott's an expert in that area, so I'd advise you to take him up on that. It'll energize your sales meeting. Our golden nugget today, as we finish up, is from Winston Churchill. A pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. What do you say, Scott?
I think it's great. Focus on the future and make it happen. And again, I don't want to have that philosophy of past performance doesn't guarantee future returns, because we need to just do the work.
Well, past performance does indicate future returns. And if you're not going to, that's what we talked about in Quadrant Two. If you're not going to do the work, you're not going to have the things happen.
Today's efforts are going to determine future returns,
that's right.
not yesterday's.
Well, that's true.
You can't rely on yesterday's. You got to do it today. So,
all right.
Good clarification.
All right.
Again, everything is at winningatselling.com.
And next week, our book club, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, habit number 3, the second half, pages 163 through 182. And I know we promised this the last 2 podcasts, but we're going to really do it. Listener questions next week. We promise. Go out and get better, one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.